Hi guys, welcome back to the channel. It's Julene with JovesStar Astrology. I hope you're having a great weekend. I'm going to talk today about the solar eclipse in the sign of Aries that is occurring tomorrow, April the 8th, 2024. Much anticipated, much talk about this eclipse, especially here in the United States, as it is hitting right through the middle of the United States, which is where I'm at. And I'm going to show you the path of the eclipse on Google Maps. And then we're going to talk a little bit about eclipses in general, the history of eclipses. I did a little research on the history of this cycle of eclipses. And in astrology, we look at the eclipses and the cycles, and each eclipse is part of a larger cycle of eclipses. And the history behind those cycles is quite interesting. And I found through my research that there are similar themes coming up. Now, the history behind eclipses within a Saros cycle it goes back very, very, very far. It's very far back that we're looking. So, and there's many eclipses within each Saros cycle. Sometimes up to 70 plus. And so when we're talking about cycles of 18 years, right, that is a very long time. So what we're going to do is take a look at the very first eclipse in this particular Saros cycle and talk about some of the things that I could glean from history regarding that very first eclipse, and then take a look at the most recent eclipse in this Saros cycle that was in the sign of Aries, and that's much, much more recent. We'll do that before we dive into the chart of this current eclipse and see if we can figure out what might be occurring, reoccurring, what kind of themes are coming up that might give us a little bit of information about what this eclipse might bring to us. So hopefully you'll find that interesting. I am going to take a look at this eclipse as it is related to all 12 rising signs, but I am going to do that video separately. So this video is just about going through the history of the Saros cycle and the current eclipse chart. And then I'll do another video a little bit later today talking about how it affects the 12 signs of the zodiac. So make sure that you catch both. Make sure you like, subscribe, and share this. Subscribe to the channel, like and share this video, comment down below. And if you need to get a hold of me, if you'd like to take a look at your chart, my contact information is down below in the description box as well. All right, so we're going to get started here with taking a look at the path of this eclipse. So here we have it. This eclipse, I'm going to move this around a little bit. This eclipse in the United States, we can see it entering in right here on the Gulf of Mexico, the Baja Mexico. So we see it coming up through Mazatlan, Durango. We see it hitting the border of Texas. So it's coming up through the border, San Antonio, Austin, Fort Worth. So Dallas, Fort Worth, these are very big populated areas. We have it coming up through Kansas, a little bit into Oklahoma, Missouri, southern part of Illinois. We've got it going through Indiana, Indianapolis, through Ohio, upstate New York, all the way through Maine and parts of Canada. So this is the path of this particular eclipse. Now, I also took a look at, I'm not going to show it here, but I took a look at the eclipse that occurred in 2017 because that was the most recent eclipse, big eclipse like this, that total eclipse that hit the United States. And that was in August of 2017. And that eclipse followed the trajectory of the opposite way. So making an X or a cross, if you want to say, across the other part of the United States. So this is within a 7-year period. And that's interesting. In astrology, 7 years is a defining moment when we read charts. And especially when we look at the Saturn cycles, because the Saturn cycles, every 7 years, they will create a square and then an opposition. And then the third quarter square before Saturn comes back around to its original place. So this is a first quarter square from 2017 for the planet Saturn, which is significant because during this eclipse, we have Saturn that is conjunct Mars. I'm going to show the chart to you. That is conjunct Mars in the sign of Pisces, that is part of this eclipse story. And this is not that chart. This is the first chart that I looked at in history. I'll get to that in a second. The ruler of this eclipse, Mars, is in the sign of Pisces. And we know that Saturn is also in Pisces. So there's something about the Saturn cycle and Saturn coming into its first quarter square in early 2025 that may relate to issues around, or things that came up around this eclipse in August of 2017. I'll touch on that a little bit more later, but I want to dive into the history of this Saros cycle. So this eclipse, I'm going to try and get my pen to work here. It was kind of futzing with me, not really wanting to wake up just a little bit ago. Yeah, and it's going to do it again. So we'll just let's just use the we'll use an alternative method. Okay, so this eclipse is in Saros cycle 139. You can see up here. And the first eclipse in this cycle occurred in the year 1501. Super long time ago. But if we follow these eclipses and study the history, they're thematic. So I want to talk a little bit about the themes that were present in the year 1501. And just stay with me, right? We're going to take a look at a more recent eclipse, like I said, and then this particular eclipse. I think you'll find it fascinating, some of the things that are related. So here in 1501, we had the eclipse down here, which really doesn't matter. I mean, honestly, I don't know what the rising sign was for this chart. My software will give us a rising sign, but none of us were there, so we will never really know for certain. But we do know the archetypes of the planets that were involved. So we have the eclipse here in the year 1501 in the sign of Gemini at 4 degrees. And Gemini is all about communication and being on the move, so travel. It is about, and you'll see a little bit more when I start to pull in the other planetary placements. But it's about data and communication, speaking out on the move. Gemini rules. It's a dual sign, right? So it's the mind. But I think for the purpose of this chart and what we know about, or what I discovered about what was going on back in 1501, you'll see that it has a lot to do with just being on the move, right? And discovering things, obviously. So we have the new moon solar eclipse there. And of course, we always look at the ruler of the eclipse to give us a little bit more information on what was going on. And there we have the ruler of Mercury, also in the sign of Gemini, exactly conjunct Chiron, the wounded healer. So it indicates that there was something that was going on there that had to do with a wounded expression of Gemini energy, of Mercury in Gemini. So either a wounding or a healing of some sort going on at the time of this eclipse. So what is interesting, and I'm going to tell you what I found for that time period. So in 1501, in the 1500s, we were just entering into what is called the modern era. If you know your history, we had things going on like slave trade. I read about the Spanish conquistadors that swept up through the South America, right? Probably coming into the United States, which at that time wasn't called the United States. At that time, it was called the New World. Interesting, New World. We had an epidemic of contagious diseases that was sweeping, affecting people all over the place. And we had a move from Catholicism, so religious movement, a move from Catholicism into a more Protestant type of religion. So let's look at this chart and see if we can actually see those themes. Well, when we're talking about the slave trade, for instance, we have Mercury and Chiron in a wounded place. Gemini represents transactions as well and movement. And Gemini is multiple, so it is more than one thing. And the slave trade was beginning back at that time, indicating that we were moving people, maybe for the purposes of work. We've got Saturn closely conjunct the eclipse at that time. So that is significant. It sort of indicates that there is some kind of difficulties or some kind of government or push for some kind of structure when it comes to moving things and communicating the things that we needed. I mean, maybe there was some kind of suppression too, like government suppression, and that would fit with the slave trade, of being able to have the freedom of voicing your opinion or to be able to move freely on your own. So that's very interesting. When it comes to the Spanish conquistadors coming over up through the border, we can see and right now we have a Mars, which is the ruler of the current solar eclipse in the sign of Pisces. But we had Mars in Pisces at that time as well. Not ruling the eclipse, obviously, Mercury is, we established that, but ruling the South Node, and which is conjunct, or fairly conjunct, Pluto. And we know that Scorpio represents power and control and money. And we have something here about the prominence of that in this particular eclipse cycle. And we have Mars in Pisces, and Mars in Pisces could represent a couple of things that I mentioned: crossing over borders, right? Pisces can represent immigration. It can represent things done in secret. Mars in Pisces transporting people for the purpose of the slave trade from another country, so across borders. Mars in Pisces can also represent, Pisces representing our health in many ways, diseases, communicable diseases, which Gemini can very much represent. And we had a square there from Mars to Mercury conjunct Chiron. So in the history, it talked about an epidemic of contagious diseases, and that particular square definitely represents that happening at that time. We had the ruler of the North Node here in the sign of Taurus, which represents resources and money. And Venus is in a very strong place in this chart in the sign of Taurus. It's in its home sign, but it's probably talking about the value of money, and the fact that it's conjunct the North Node makes that much, much bigger. And we have, again, the slave trade. So that axis there very much talks about who is making money, how we're making money, what those resources might be. And we know obviously that Venus rules Libra. So there was no placement in that chart for Libra, but it makes you wonder what kinds of relationships or agreements were being made at the time that were designed to increase the wealth of certain people or some people. We had Jupiter here in Aries, and Jupiter is about truth, and Aries is about taking action and declaring independence in some ways. And again, that goes back to the Spanish conquistadors actually breaking through the barriers or borders, or into, chartering, unknown territory, or breaking into new territory for what? To claim their independence, Jupiter. And there were probably fights, and a lot of aggression, and obviously a lot of physical movement, but as well as how much physicality did it take? How much war was there? Jupiter can make things very big. So interesting that this chart represents those kinds of things. And we see those kinds of things, I think we can agree, happening in current times, right? We have been challenged with the potential, or, figuring out how to maneuver what we had been told was a contagious epidemic. We've got issues at the border of the United States where this eclipse is occurring. And we have people, being trafficked. We've got trafficking issues, right? So it's like modern day slavery, in my opinion. But we're hearing about all of these things, and these, very powerful people that are making a lot of profit on the sex trafficking business. And so now these things are coming out, being uncovered in some way. Pluto conjunct the South Node is like what is coming out from under the rug, right? What is being uncovered that could be related to crime, or could be related to sex, or a lot of power, control, and money. And so interesting that was happening back in 1501, the slave trade, and it is happening currently today. And we're seeing that play out on the world stage. And most definitely we're seeing those things play out in the United States. So that's a real quick look at the chart of the first Saros cycle. We're going to take a look at the second one as well, that I pulled up and did some research on. And that's going to be this chart of the eclipse in 2006. As you can see, this eclipse is also a part of that same Saros cycle. Happened on March 29th, 2006, here in the United States. I just ran all of these charts for my local time. Not trying to get too specific, but I'm trying to show you the essence of how the themes can kind of repeat when it comes to eclipses, and the way that we look at it in astrology. So we have this chart of the eclipse, the total solar eclipse that happened in 2006, March 29th, 2006. And we see that this eclipse as well is conjunct the north node of the moon. And so that is making this eclipse very prominent. I mean, eclipses, that's what they are. The eclipse is, it's an eclipse because it's conjunct the nodes of the moon. And it creates a more prominent astrological event. So we have this in Aries, and we're having this eclipse in Aries tomorrow. So we're looking at the ruler at that time of that eclipse, which is Mars over here in the sign of Gemini. Again, we're talking about movement. We're talking about communication. We can be talking about angry communication, things like protests and marches and issues relating to travel. I took a look at what was going on in 2006, and here we have it. We had immigration protests. So a lot of people speaking out about folks crossing the borders. Obviously, in 1501, you know, the modes of communication is much different than it was in 2006, and definitely now. But the theme is similar, right? We've got people speaking out about the freedom of movement, or how they feel attacked because of the movement that is occurring or was occurring at the borders, or what was just going on in immigration in general. And Pisces represents immigration. And we have Mercury over here at that time conjunct the planet Uranus, which is about explosive types of communication. And, you know, Pisces is about no boundaries. So this is likely, and I'm going to tag this in the chart as being related to immigration issues. A lot of other things happened. I have a list here. We had a lot of political scandals that were going on, and Aquarius represents politics. So we have that. We had a lot of things going on with the weather that year. So we had volcano eruptions. We had, let me find the weather related stuff first. We had an earthquake that was prominent in the world. We had typhoons, we had hurricanes, we had record heat that year as well, which would represent Aries. Additionally, and what I find interesting is like some of the more poignant things that happened was we had things like the Federal Reserve. So we had Ben Bernanke, who we know was the head of the Federal Reserve, who made a statement regarding Chinese ownership of U.S. assets, and saying that the activity in that area, in his opinion, he advised, was not large enough to put the country at risk economically. And so obviously that was going on back then, and we're hearing things about that now, and I'll get to that when we get to the current chart. But that I found a very interesting correlation for something that is coming back up during this eclipse cycle currently. We had, like I said, and we also had lots of anti-war demonstrations, which would be Mars and Gemini. Could be the Mercury conjunct Uranus. We had let's see, we had heavy rains. Oh, we had a train blast that occurred. This is Mars and Gemini transportation. We had that happen. We had a plane crash in Kentucky. Keep in mind, this Mars and Gemini definitely represents this eclipse, the ruler of the eclipse, and how many transportation issues that we had. I already mentioned a few. So the plane crash in Kentucky, we had a Greyhound bus that crashed in New York that was going to Montreal. We had another plane crash in New York, a smaller plane that crashed into a high-rise building in the state of New York. We had we had a mosque bombing in the state of Indiana, in Bloomington, Indiana. That would be more along the lines, I mean, of a religious event, right? Big blast. Um, that was trying to make a religious statement. Whoever did this was trying to make a religious statement of some sort. That is represented by Mercury conjunct Uranus. We had, let's see, what else did I want? There's so many things. I wrote down so many things here. We had a hazardous waste plant explode in North Carolina. Definitely this Mercury conjunct Uranus. We had the execution of Saddam Hussein. We have Pluto over here in the sign of Sagittarius, which is death, transformation, through a secret mission of some sort. Sagittarius, definitely a world leader, foreign leader. So the death of that leader. We had issues with the interest rates and the subprime housing crisis that came up during that time, all represented by points in the chart. And again, I don't want to belabor it, but we had a lot of weather events. We had some financial issues. We had a lot of travel related incidents, and we had political scandals and financial scandals with the systems that were going on in the year 2006. So very interesting. I also want to say that, not everything is bad, but, when it comes to all of this Aquarius, there was bound to be technological advances, interesting things happening there. And so we had, and also in art and entertainment. And I once looked at a chart. I did a video way, way, way back when I first started my channel about that year. And that, if you see the Mercury or the Venus conjunct Neptune in the sign of Aquarius, this is very much about technology when it comes to art and music. And we had the electro sort of, what do they call it, the electro something, music time period, and just a lot of unusual music coming out. I mean, listen, we had Lady Gaga back then, things like that. But we also had a lot of technology that was interesting, things going on with Apple. We had the Nintendo Wii that came out, which is represented by the Mars and Gemini, these Gemini's games, as well as the technology. That was just kind of, for a lot of us, kind of out there, right? I didn't look at what kind of movies were released and things like that, just a little bit about the music, but very much techno type things going on, and a lot of advances in technology, which we know is happening as well now, with the really rapid growth in things like AI. But the Nintendo Wii was interesting because Mars represents physical movement. And although we offered a lot of different entertainment opportunities through games, it was new, which Mars represents. Aries, the solar eclipse, represents something new. But it was also physical. There was an element with the Wii where everybody used this new system as a form of exercise. And that's definitely represented in this chart. Another really interesting thing that I read about was Warren Buffett that year donated $30 million to Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. And Jupiter in Scorpio is about big money, right? And it can be about donations. And Aquarius over here is about charity and donation. So it could represent a foundation. And there is a connection there by square to Neptune's, but it's like, it kind of makes me wonder. And of course, Venus is there conjunct Neptune. So it's like money, changing hands, but as a charity move, which Uranus or which Aquarius represents, But do we really know what that was for? I don't know. It's very interesting. Or did we know at the time, or do we know what it was used for? The reason I'm bringing that up is because I find it very interesting what we're hearing about the Bill Gates foundations, and maybe what his intent is, according to a lot of people. And it's very interesting. So I don't know, you can take that where you want, but it's interesting that it's coming up during this cycle. So that is eclipse in 2006. And, for all of you individually, you can take a look back. I mean, obviously none of us remember 1501 in our past lives. I mean, some people do, past life and soul life retrieval. So, maybe they're relating to some of those things that happened back at the beginning of the modern era. But we can think back to 2006, and especially since this 2006 eclipse was in the sign of Aries, we might be able to remember like what was going on in 2006. What were we doing? I have Aries in the 11th house, and I was starting new work projects and networking with different people. I was getting ready to start out on my own, exclusive of working with anybody else. It was kind of the beginning of a new identity for me in terms of how I was seen in my work life, right? Which 11th house, comes from, comes from the 10th house, right? So it can be like gains from employment, or just, changes in that regard, or just doing something new. And I can definitely relate to that, among other things. But if you want an idea of what this eclipse might bring, think about, for you personally, think about what was going on in 2006. But as you can see, there are themes that are being that are recurring through this particular cycle. All right, so let's get to the current eclipse that we are having tomorrow. And as you can see, this eclipse is in the same cycle, right? It's in the Saros cycle 139, just like the other two charts that we just took a look at, occurring in 2024, tomorrow, April 8th, 11:18 a.m. Here where I'm at in Phoenix. So 10:18, because California, the West Coast, is an hour behind right now because of daylight savings. And then it will be occurring at 2:18 a.m. So this is, or I'm sorry, 2:18 p.m. on the East Coast of the United States. So check a time converter if you're elsewhere in the world to see what time this event is occurring. And of course, because it's happening here in the United States, it's a big frenzy. We have a lot of people that have been planning for a very long time to gather near the path of the eclipse here in the United States. And I showed you where that was, to witness this event. So let's take a look at some of the variables here. So we have the eclipse here at 19 degrees of Aries, and significantly conjunct and perfectly and exactly conjunct Chiron. Chiron is a really important player in this eclipse, because Chiron is the wounded healer. So the story of Chiron is that, and we'll get into the detail, but basically he was wounded. He experienced a wound that he could never really heal from. And it was a physical wound for Chiron. And depending on where Chiron is in your chart, it can be a physical wound, or it can be an emotional wound. But in the sign of Aries, largely it represents something physical, or at least something that has wounded our identity. And that applies to the story of Chiron on both fronts, right? Identity and a physical wounding. And so having this eclipse, having Chiron exactly, if you look at this, 19 degrees, I mean, literally it is exactly conjunct this eclipse. And so that makes the theme of wounding in some way very, very loud during this time period. Now, eclipses are it's not just a one shot thing. It's like we could wake up tomorrow, we could view the eclipse. We may never, we may not see anything significant happen tomorrow, but maybe in the next 6 months or so. This is a total solar eclipse. So the cycle and the events that could unfold can actually go up to 4 years. So this is something that we're going to watch take effect over time. And what timing might that be? Well, we can see that, we know that when planets actually hit the same degree as an eclipse, it triggers the themes of that eclipse again. It triggers that energy. And so we have Mercury that's retrograde, another significant part of this eclipse that will be going back over, moving retrograde, the eclipse point. It'll hit there on about April 16th. Mercury is about communication and the mind, and Mercury retrograde is talking about the past. It's going to retrograde over Chiron. So are we going to have themes about past wounding or past physical issues coming up? Are we going to have conversations or information come out about Aries type things that we have to deal with from the past? Most definitely, we could see some of those things happening. And again, Aries is largely physical, ruled by Mars, which is over here in the sign of Pisces, conjunct Saturn. Now, we looked at that prior chart in the cycle where Mars was in Pisces, although the eclipse was in Gemini, but still Mars in Pisces. It's conjunct Saturn. This is the beginning of a new cycle for Mars and Saturn as it comes into that conjunction that will last 2 years. The last time Mars conjunct Saturn was in April. I think it was April 7th, 2022, when Mars and Saturn came together to begin a new cycle in the sign of Aquarius. Now we have it in the sign of Pisces, but Mars is the ruler of this eclipse. And so when we talk about what kinds of things could we be revisiting, what kinds of things could we be, having return from the past that we have to have conversations about, or that we have to heal in some way because Chiron is involved. Well, we're talking about Pisces things that we are trying to get past Mars, and maybe we're having difficulty Saturn, because the Mars-Saturn conjunction indicates a lot of hard work or a lot of difficulty in accomplishing something, or feeling that you're coming up against, or that there's some kind of delay or some kind of block to actually realizing something that Mars, the ruler of this in Aries, that you're trying to accomplish for yourself personally, a change in your own personal identity, a healing of sorts of your body, or just claiming your independence and finding your voice, possibly. So this Mars is significant in that it's conjunct Saturn. And so we may feel a little frustrated, but what are Pisces things, right? And what kinds of things could we be revisiting or talking about when it comes to Chiron and Aries? Well, we could be talking about mental health issues. We could be talking about water issues. We could be talking about things passing away. We could be mourning things that we have lost, and trying to get past issues, right? And Pisces is about the past. So, we might have things come up that we're learning about, or challenges physically that we're now able to relate to past issues. We talked about the contagious diseases, that theme that was in the prior charts. Maybe we're hearing something now about what that entire time period meant for us that we just went through in 2020, and what that lockdown or that movement, restriction of movement meant, or the health issues that occurred. Something like that could come up. I think we're also talking about and dovetailing in, sort of related, is frustrations trying to access Piscean things like healthcare and good, clean water, and getting our mental health taken care of. This could also be about fighting against problems that are Pisces related. So again, mental health, poverty, the loss of benefits, public benefits, drug-related issues, and problems that we might be trying to cut out of our lives, or is going on in the collective. Well, we know all of those things are happening. We're seeing a lot of activity around those things, but this eclipse very much feels like an eclipse where we are going back and trying to clean up, or at least learning about what a lot of those cycles meant, and how they affected us physically, and how we move forward from here. And we could really be trying to cut through the challenges, cut through the barriers and delays, and we could be feeling frustrated. So this Mars Saturn cycle, we've got to get through and maybe even let go of something from the past before we can get to this brand new beginning that the eclipse, ruled by Mars in Aries, a brand new beginning for ourselves. Before we can get there, we have to let go of, possibly, or we're challenged in some way, at least in the way of having to work very hard to get to that new beginning, that new expression, that new identity. And it could be very frustrating. So this eclipse, and you can see like all of the planets, most of them are very concentrated here. So let's talk about what is related to the past cycles here. What do we got right now? We've got issues. And, if I were to take this chart and throw it over the United States Sibley chart, we have Aries. United States has Aries occupying its fourth house, which is all about its natural resources. It's all about its housing situation, right? It's about, defending your homeland. It's about starting new things when it comes to what things are going on in our country, in our state. It's about individuation and a fight for independence, and it's about individual people taking up a cause of some sort, or establishing or declaring what they want and need, and figuring out a way to go after it. And yeah, Aries can represent anger and aggression. And when we've got Chiron in the mix here, and Mercury, I think this is also going to represent very loud declarations of what people have been feeling, and how the past has contributed to the suppression of their individual expressions or their physical well-being in some way. So that seems to be a big theme. And we know that we have housing issues. We have problems with the interest rates. We have problems with our natural resources. We have people wanting to start creating their own sources of and ways of generating their own resources. And we have a lot of separation and dividing. People are going off in their own direction. We also have a lot going on about security issues, like personal and physical security issues. Uh, we've got people that are, have installed security cameras and are starting to take self-defense classes. And this could also represent the beginning of a new cycle where people are really putting a plan together for how they will become physically stronger in their bodies, but also in the way that they're able to defend themselves and their homes and their families. I see this very loudly in this chart as well. And why is that? Well, we have Pisces, we have border issues right now. So we have people wanting to do things differently and against, potential tradition. It's like, well, nobody's going to save us. So, Aries, the hero, we're going to figure out how we can protect ourselves and what can we start new. And the border issues are going to be, in my opinion, a very big deal. And Mars conjunct Saturn, Pisces represents borders and immigration. We might see some lockdown of the borders. We've already seen issues at the border where Aries, we've had to have military and law enforcement get involved. Just a couple of weeks ago, we had folks coming up from the south, from Mexico. You see the theme, the connection with the Spanish conquistadors back in 1501, the first eclipse in this cycle. We have those things going on now. We have we have fighting, immigration, and border issues. We have healthcare and mental health issues. We've got drug issues. All these Pisces things. And what is it doing? It's not good for us physically, which is Aries. It's not for our physical health. And there could be a deterioration of sorts because of all of those things. I mean, there has been. So now we might be in a fight to restore some of those things. And we're doing it for ourselves individually and maybe breaking off into individual groups, which I think that, because of all of the upheaval politically and the division, which, listen, there's just more things here that could divide us, especially when we're talking about Aries, which again in United States charts represents the mood at home and what's going on. And Aries can represent anger, and it can also represent war. Mars is the god of war, and it's in Pisces. So who are we fighting against? And are we, because Pisces is like, we're fighting so many different things, things that we can't see. It's a feeling, maybe a feeling of oppression, maybe just, a feeling or an anger of not really knowing what's going on. Mars conjunct Saturn, like who's in charge, not having a suspicion and a distrust of what's going on in our organizations, right? Or with our leaders. And incidentally, solar eclipses, right? The sun is prominent, has historically represented world leaders, right? The sun is the god, right? Is the leader, solar figures. And so we could see something happen with a prominent figure, government figure in our country, in the United States, potentially. And Mercury's retrograde. So what is coming back around? What are we hearing about that we didn't know about before? Are the border issues going to come back up? We're going into an election year here. And, if you're following anything, and I'm not even a political person, but if you're following anything that has to do with politics in America, it's pretty much a shit show here right now. And, people are split between, what's going on financially, and, what we're doing to protect our country. So a lot of political changes, and this could result in upheaval and anger from the actual people. So could we be infighting? And is all of that fighting, over things that are going on at the borders or in other countries, or whether it's with our own health and our own healthcare systems, or just the division and the fighting and the taking up of, ideas and actions that are going to serve ourselves personally. Are we creating a distraction with all of that fighting, right? What's going to happen as a result of that? And so we've got a lot of those things coming up. And I wrote a list of things that I think are really going to be a big deal, and some things that we've seen. So, like brand new initiatives, changes, and individuation from the laws of the land, how we are going to protect our resources, and people actually doing things outside of tradition, which is a lot about the South Node here. And the ruler of the South Node is Venus in the sign of Aries, which is very much about, I'm going to do what makes me happy. I'm going to go after my own sense of wealth, my own purpose and identity. This is very much about the individual. But we have new things happening that are different than what we might have experienced in the past. And let's not forget that Libra, which represents law in a lot of ways. Yes, it's all relationships and themes as well, but relationships with what? Many different things. Relationships with the laws of the land, with what's fair and balanced. Saturn is exalted in the sign of Libra, so it's very much about rules and law and what's fair. And so there's an individuation here in a fight to do things differently. So just like I mentioned back in 2006, when Ben Bernanke said that selling United States land to China was not going to have an economic effect on the country. Now we see Indiana, which, by the way, is in the path of this eclipse. You see Indiana that has just passed a bill saying that they are no longer going to allow the purchase of land from other countries. And, obviously a lot of people have opinions on that, but when we are having trouble finding good land to farm, or, for people to independently begin to take care of themselves and their families and grow their own food and, create a home for themselves, then we have, a lot of money being spent to purchase our land so that we can't do that. And obviously, I think that's going to be an issue. And I also think with Aries representing war, and in a lot of ways, the Native Americans and the things that happened on Indian reservations, I see these things coming up, and maybe we're going to be figuring out how to clean up the toxicity, the chemicals, Pisces, in the land, and running into finding out, exactly what that was, what those things were in the past that actually contaminated our land, which contaminates our water and things like that. And we could see those kinds of things happen now too, especially with this eclipse. What will we see going forward? Are we going to see issues with large bodies of water? It's entirely possible, which would create toxicity or toxic waste, in water or bodies of water. And we looked at the path of the eclipse, which is close to large bodies of water, or issues and problems on regarding water. We could see things like that as well. Mars is attacking the construct Saturn. Could we see wars and accidents and issues occurring on water? We could. I mean, we just saw the bridge incident in Maryland. What else could we see? So I talked about the Native Americans. We are talking about the correlation between the slave trade and this eclipse cycle. And we see the sex trafficking trade being exposed and investigated, and powerful people in the community, Aquarius, being investigated and exposed for sex trafficking, which is modern day slavery, obviously. We see that happening. I think we're going to hear more about those kinds of things. And there could be Uh, let's see. What else did I have written here? The health of children, I think, is going to be a big deal. We talk about Aries, we talk about physical health, we talk about activity and sports. I think we're going to see some correlations or inquiries about why we've got really healthy, athletic individuals in our community that are having heart attacks or seizures. Um, I think we're going to look at what caused those things, Pisces things. What were we ingesting in our bodies when it comes to drugs or chemicals potentially, or what's kind of toxic things are in the environment that or that we've received or been given, that is causing young people to be that sick at such a high rate. And I've noticed it. So I think we're going to see a lot about that. So a lot going on in the sports arena and with how kids and young people are doing physically, and maybe trying to find ways to actually treat them and get them healthier. I think getting healthier is going to be a theme for all of us, or should be, because I think issues will be coming up that are going to show us where we need to focus on our health. Let's see. That was the list that I had, that would kind of show the relation to the past cycles. So we're seeing a lot of these things come up. I worry about, with all of this Mars, this Aries energy, about fighting, infighting, and whether or not, because it's so much so about the individual and the individual groups, again, are we going to be fighting amongst one another? Aries is the hero. So Aries doesn't have to be the aggressor, although it can be. And a lot of astrologers are talking about this eclipse, as far as taking control of your own life, your own health, separating from relationships that are codependent or not fair, and striking out and finding your own sense of identity, claiming what it is that you love. All of that makes sense with Venus and Aries. And a lot of us will be doing that. And it'll be a long, arduous, potentially cycle of not really understanding or knowing what the overall destination will be, other than to just feel better. Mars conjunct Saturn in Pisces is maybe not feeling like we're on stable ground, or mentally or physically. And so a lot of us will likely be doing this. But we have to look at and consider Chiron here as the wounded healer and say, okay, well, yes, everybody should be looking after themselves and taking the initiative to actually take care of themselves and find their own identity, do their own thing. They're going to be the hero of their own life. But there are people that unfortunately already possess or have been provoked or pushed through, unfortunate situations in their life, to be expressing Aries energy in a destructive way. We don't want to encourage more of that, right? We don't want to encourage more anger, more aggression, more defensiveness, but hopefully we can find some healing in reviewing the things from the past and realizing that those of us, the individuals, which a lot of this Pluto and Aquarius is about, individuating, the collective individuating and changing the trajectory of things, hopefully, that we can actually be focusing on ourselves, finding our own way, gaining our own strength and happiness with Venus there. That's going to be a big thing. But helping other people as well. Chiron was wounded, yes, but it gave him empathy. And that empathy allowed him to help other people heal. And so I think we'll see a lot of people in that camp as well, where they're trying to help other people heal, whether it's physically, emotionally, or just getting them, help, searching for their own identity and finding their place in the world and their voice and their happiness and all of those things. There'd be a great way to obviously see this eclipse shake out. But we do, I think, need to be careful that we aren't creating a distraction within ourselves with too much infighting and too much selfishness, because Aries, is selfish. And yes, there is an element where within processes and government structures, and probably within our own families and our own personal relationships, where we have to embrace a sense of selfishness and stop giving more of ourselves than we're getting in return, which is a lot of what this eclipse is about too. But remember, we have the Jupiter conjunct Uranus event, right? Big astrology event everybody's talking about, that's going to happen shortly after this eclipse. So the eclipse is going to be triggered. Mercury, I mentioned, is going to travel retrograde, and it's going to hit the eclipse point on April the 16th. Jot down that date. What happens on April the 16th? Do you hear from something from the past? Do you find something? Do you get some kind of information or news, or have a conversation that hopefully provides some kind of healing necessary? Because again, a lot of this Mars and Pisces is going to be clearing out the past, mourning losses, apologizing, and so that we can move forward. Remember, that's a lot of what this is. But jot down April 16th. And then shortly after that, on April the 20th, when Jupiter and Uranus come into contact, there could be some kind of growth. Mars will have moved past, maybe we know what that block is. Maybe we've experienced that upset, or we're starting to come into more energy, and we are starting to see through the fog what it is and understand what it is that we need to do, or what is going to make us personally happy, or what is starting for us, right? What we're starting for ourselves. We have this Jupiter-Uranus conjunction, and so there could be a rapid and sudden growth there that we experience that could be very, very positive. But when we're talking about the United States and where this eclipse is hitting, what kind of events are we going to see that could be creating distractions in our country? Well, I will say that I looked at the last Jupiter-Uranus conjunction in the sign of Taurus, and what was interesting, it happened in 1941, and that was right before it happened in May 1941. I believe it was May 17th, 1941. And of course, we had World War II going on. So there was a lot going on over, we were involved in foreign affairs, but it was going on elsewhere. But that year, exactly 7 months later, it happened. Actually, this conjunction was May 7th, because I noted that it was exactly 7 months later. So exactly 7 months later, we had the bombing at Pearl Harbor. I don't know if we'll have some kind of catastrophic event. I'm not saying that we're going to have the beginning of a war, but we could have some kind of upset. It would be related to finances. What was interesting about my research for regarding that war and that time period was I read over and over again, and Taurus is a financial sign, that there was growth, economic growth, but that the belief or the history says that economic growth occurred because of the war. So is there some kind of relation to war and money? We know that and this was just coming out of the Depression back then. And, I read that war changed the trajectory of the economy and brought the United States out of the Depression, which makes you wonder. It's like, how much money is involved in war, and why is it created? And I also read back then that it was I think the Lend-Lease Act or something, where we were actually financially supporting other countries and wars going on elsewhere during that time period. So I don't know, I'm not an economics person and I don't know a lot about that, but in the astrology and the study of cycles, I wanted to look at when Jupiter Uranus last created a conjunction in the sign of Taurus, and that's what I saw. So 1941, you guys can go back and do your own research. But I found that to be very, very interesting. We have an individuation process. We have a healing of the body and the mind and of our own independence here, of generating our own resources, of taking care of our own children. And we've got anger and aggression, and we will likely see protests and issues at the border. I think this is going to really be a lot about health and wellness, illness, what we're ingesting in our bodies. We might really see some groundbreaking things. I mentioned a little while ago in the video that we're coming into the first quarter square from where Saturn was in 2006. So Saturn, and that's, to me, that's significant because Saturn is now in Pisces, and Saturn was up here at 21 degrees during the eclipse. Actually, it was 2017, not 2006. Sorry. So it was at 21 degrees Sagittarius retrograde during the eclipse in August of 2017. And if you look here, Saturn is in Pisces at 14 degrees. It will be at 21 degrees, which would create an exact square to where Saturn was back in 2017 during the last total eclipse in the United States. It will be there in the, I think it was March 2025. Let me just double check because I think I kept it up on my search bar. So I'm just going to peek here. Yes, March 7th, 2025. So the 2017 total solar eclipse that happened in August, Saturn was at 21 degrees Sagittarius retrograde. And on March the 7th, 2025, it will enter into its first quarter square at 21 degrees of Pisces, and it will be direct. So when we talk about Saturn related things, so government rules, delays, and also time, what kinds of things are going to be coming up, that square is going to be either like testing. It's going to test the waters. What is being tested from back then? And I looked that up to see if I could find a correlation, like what was going on in 2017 that we might now be tested, like the strength of the process, or being looked at within our structures, or within the government in some way. First quarter squares, even when you experience those in your personal chart, is usually like it's the first test, right? And something comes up related to that Saturn expression that we have to deal with, or we have to tweak, or if it doesn't make the cut, it's like the Saturn square can, it's like, this is gone. It's weakened. It didn't stand the test. So this is a first quarter square. And I feel like this is going to be part of it, because this eclipse is going to have, the eclipse we're having tomorrow is going to have long range effects. So what I found was the things that were going on when Saturn was in Sag, and will be creating that perfect square again, March of 2024 was, I think you guys, I hope you guys find this as interesting as I do. When it comes to politics, Donald Trump was being inaugurated. We had, and he was using the slogan, America First, which had its origins, this is really interesting, which had its origins, that slogan, founded in 1940 to oppose U.S. involvement in World War II that was characterized by its anti-Semitic, pro-fascist rhetoric. Isn't that interesting? Will that come up again? Are we going to hear more? I mean, obviously, Donald Trump is really in the news for lots of different reasons, but collectively, are we going to see or hear about something? This is he's going to be, I believe, a big topic. He is, but I think there's going to be more. But keep jot down March 2024, March 7th, 2024, in and around that area. We had talk about immigration. We had immigration issues. We going on back then. Of course, that was something that Trump was bringing up, talking about the border walls. We had bans on the travel bans that were going on, especially with Muslim people, because we had the war going on in the Middle East at that time. We'll see how that correlates during that first quarter square. What's going to come around as a result of the things that happened at that time? I believe there will be some things. We had issues with the border wall in Mexico. So, and illegal immigration. And I think that, I talked about this eclipse, that's going to be a thing. But there's going to be some kind of relation to, do we lock the borders down again? Do we keep them open? The Supreme Court was involved in some of the decision making back in 2017 regarding, whether the administration or political leaders had the right to do those kinds of things. So this could come up again during this first quarter square. We also had the issue with Trump and Russia. So I don't know, not a coincidence, right? First quarter square. Are the things that he represented and that was going on back then going to actually dissolve and change? Maybe because there's somebody else coming in, or are they going to be reinforced? Do we find that people are, following that? They're speaking up and saying, yeah, we want to do that, or we want to do something different and we're going to go our own direction. And this is a brand new cycle with brand new things. Or, are people angry? And is there that division that I was talking about? Possibly. We also had, and I think this is really a kind of a big deal in this cycle for sure, especially since we have the heavy Pisces concentration in the Mars conjunct Saturn, is that we had a lot of stuff arguing and fighting in political parties in the Senate regarding the Accountable Healthcare Act, the Affordable Healthcare Act, rather, and what we call Obamacare. I think this is going to be huge. I think it's possible that the frustrations and the changes in the healthcare system is so significant, and that we're finding out that those moves, and I was in healthcare for a long time, did not help the healthcare system. It allowed for a lot of greed, a lot of breakdown of processes. People do not have access to healthcare. They can't afford it. I think this is going to be potentially a break, and maybe folks going in different directions. And it may be Aries, people starting their own process, putting their own organizations together, creating change for themselves. For us, I think this is going to be a brand new start and a big change. I think that there is going to be significant change with healthcare and the accessibility to healthcare. I see that those processes and structures are dissolving, which is very much Pisces, Saturn and Pisces. It's like those things are dissolving. The secrets are coming out, and we're responsible for fighting to put them back together. Because people can't afford healthcare or they can't access it, and the processes have completely broken down. I think this is going to be a big, big thing with this eclipse and changes in that area as a result of that Saturn square. So that Saturn square, to me, I know that it's not technically it is part of this eclipse, actually. I mean, maybe you're not hearing astrologers talk about it, but it's part of this eclipse because Saturn in Pisces is conjunct Mars, and Mars is the ruler of this eclipse. So keep an eye out between now and the beginning of 2025. We're going to have some significant changes in healthcare because I think people are going to get pissed. And it's just going to be a big, big topic that just, I think it's going to be inflamed. Let's see, what else happened back then? We had the NFL anthem, the protests. I don't know if Aries represents sports. I don't know. Do we have something come back in? Mars or Mercury is retrograde, which is games and players, and Aries is sports. And I just read something yesterday about Colin Kaepernick being given a limited contract to play in some way with the Seattle Seahawks. And he's the one that started that whole NFL controversy. So we see that coming back around. There were issues between, let's see, there were Confederate monuments that fell in Virginia. We had those kinds of protests that took us back in time, right? American Civil War, very much Aries, Mercury retrograde. Will things like that come back up? The opioid, the drug epidemic, obviously, and the trafficking of drugs across the borders. This is going to continue. Maybe something happens. Maybe there is a shutdown because of that, or some kind of new initiatives are put together by people in our country regarding the war on drugs, and something changes. Maybe we are actually putting together programs that help people that are struggling with those things. We shall see. I also believe when we go back to weather, I think we're going to see a lot of weather issues and a lot of things on water. I think during this eclipse, we got to be really careful during the Midwest, right? That's tornado alley. And I think we could see a lot of really severe weather, wind, rain, maybe even blizzards. We'll see what happens with this eclipse this week. But we know we've got a lot of people traveling to those areas. So one thing for sure, when it comes to Aries and individual people coming together, even for, to do something fun, the concentration of all of those people in one area. And if we were to have a catastrophic weather event, it's like if you're in the area of the eclipse, I would just say extreme caution, in traveling is going to be really important. We have a Mercury retrograde in Aries. And Aries is also accidents. Don't drive into water or into storms because Mars is in Pisces. So could look for something like that. Also, we might see extreme heat this year as well. This is just mundane stuff. Extreme heat, a lot of fires. I predict that those things will recur with this eclipse. For sure. And just look for things to happen in and around water. I also feel like because Mercury is in Aries and it is retrograde and is hitting Chiron, and Mars is in Pisces, conjunct Saturn, not only will we have potentially accidents and issues that happen in and around water, but I also think that we may have some mass protests that result in loss of life, potentially. Unfortunately, we shall see. But again, when I talked about that extreme expression of Aries, where the anger is so out of control that we're attacking, right, people, and being angry and aggressive, maybe issues on the roads as well when it comes to anger and fights and aggression, but definitely a time to try and control anger and frustration. Again, we could help people. We could be Chiron, the empathetic healer that helps others, or we could be Chiron in Aries, who is actually lashing out and displaying those really aggressive wounds onto others in the public. So we'll see what happens. But anyway, that's my take on the eclipse. There are some positive things, that we can look forward to. The Jupiter-Uranus conjunction really could bring a glow up for a lot of us. which would be awesome. We also have, Pluto here. Let's just talk about Pluto, part of this eclipse that is sextiling Venus in the sign of Aries, which really is allowing us to pull away from power and control, find the power that we need to change our lives, whether that's separating from a group or individuating. Aquarius is very much about individuating as well and creating change and progress. And sextile Venus in the sign of Aries, this is progress and change that will benefit us. Things that will make us happy, going after the things that we need, whether that's how we create our own wealth or our own happiness, our own physical well-being. The sextile from Pluto is working very nicely with this eclipse. So yeah, it's all about, who are you involved with, right? Pluto and Aquarius. What are you putting together for your community? Are you pulling away from a community that you've been involved in and just going towards something that is your own unique expression of self, and appreciating yourself for that? It's like, who cares what everybody else thinks? That's a lot of this Libra Aries, a nodal axis in transit is, who cares what other people think about me? I'm going to be me. I'm going to take care of me in whatever way I need to, and heal those wounds. That's the opportunity that we have, is to heal whatever wounds we may be experiencing. And yeah, it's going to be hard work, but it's going to lead us right to this growth and this abundance in one way or another. And let's hope for that for us. And that's what's coming, down the pipe, right? We'll see what happens. We'll see what shakes out. The other thing I was going to say is like traveling. I talked about that Saros cycle where there were travel accidents. I think we're going to see some of those things. I don't know, personally, like being in a plane or on a boat right now does not appeal to me. Being in large crowds of people that might be impatient or angry in some way does not appeal to me. We'll see what happens along the trajectory of the eclipse cycle. I think we're going to see border stuff. And just some individuation in interesting situations. So let's hope we don't see any kind of aggression or anger or big explosive things occurring. But we may see some of those things. All right. That's the eclipse. I am going to do a video here at some point today on the 12 signs and what you might be looking for with this eclipse. So stay tuned, come back, check it out. Maybe I'll do it live. And throw in some personal readings if anybody joins me. But keep an eye out for that. That'll be coming. I need to take a little break, grab something to eat, feed my little dog, get some water. Anyway, thanks for hanging out and letting me show you the history of this Saros cycle and some of the themes that are coming back up and what we might be looking for in the future. It's a long cycle. But just hopefully you mark down those dates. I think those are going to be important dates to see some of the effects of this eclipse unfold here in the short term. So yeah, I will talk to you soon. Thanks for hanging out. May the stars, of course, forever be in your favor. Take good care. See you soon. See you soon. Blah, blah. See, I can't talk. See you soon. Bye-bye.